Yeah, I mean, this is not... You want to start a business? Get a nice file cabinet, because you're gonna need it. There you go. That's all it takes, guys. What's up, guys? Tay here at Liftark. Let me start by saying this video is in no way sponsored by Shop Sabre. I bought this machine with my own money, well, the bank's money. I'm paying them back for that. Yes, folks, I financed it, of course. So in this video, we're gonna be going over what it's been like to own this machine, to use it, to learn it, to fine tune it, to struggle with it, to cuss at it, and to maintain it and that kind of thing. All the ups and downs of owning a CNC plasma cutter as a small shop. Before we get into that though, I want to let you know that I am still working on the conference table build. We did part one a few videos ago. You check that out. It's up here somewhere. Stoked with how that's coming, and I'll show you where it is. I have the parts up here. They're almost done with the metal fab on that, and then we'll be finishing the base and then building the top out of this lumber right here. So this is a lot of the old wood that was saved from the mezzanine and all the stuff, some stuff that I saved from the old shop. So my hope is to slab these out, chop them up, make a tabletop out of the wood from the original shop, and mount it to the new base that I built with the new equipment in the shop. So it'll be kind of a cool hybrid project. We'll get to that soon enough. But again, today's video is about the plasma cutter. I guess real quick, it all started, I have 15 years of fabrication experience, mostly in the custom furniture industry, working with salvage materials at my old job, Black Dog Salvage. I did 8 years on the television show where I had cameras in my face while I was building things under pressure. It was a lot of fun. Never built the same thing twice. So if you've ever used a plasma cutter or a CNC plasma cutter even as a fabricator, you know how valuable they can be. You know, it was one of the first big purchases I made as a shop, so it took me about 3 years to renovate this building, and if you followed the renovation series, you've seen all that. And after getting the basic things figured out in here, power, all my welders, tool locations, outlet, electrical runs and everything, this was the next thing we tackled. Loan rates at the beginning or mid 2020 were actually pretty good. Middle of a pandemic, banks are trying to make it appealing for people to take out loans, and so I took advantage of the good rates. Before that though, I was talking with Shop Sabre. I found these guys online, just started searching general terms like best CNC plasma cutters, you know, and then getting familiar with the market. Like, what are the cheap ones like? What are their downfalls? What are the expensive ones getting you for the money? And are they worth the extra coin? And then where, if anything, is the middle ground, the sweet spot between price and performance? I stumbled across Shop Sabre. It seems like a really nice, friendly place to work. Everyone I've talked to, they're super nice and super supportive. So, you know, when you see stuff like that, it helps. You know, you see they're very outward facing and vocal about their product and what the services they offer, and it helped a consumer like me make the decision. While I didn't do all the market research there is, in this same sort of category, there was the Lincoln Torchmate, which was another $15,000 or something like that for this same spec machine. JD Squared offers one that was pretty similarly priced, but it had lacked features that this machine had. I'm not sure, I can't remember now which specific features it lacked, but there's always gonna be a downside though, you know, unless you're buying just the cream of the crop, the Rolls-Royce CNC plasma cutter, which I don't even really know who would make something like that. So once I knew I wanted to go with Shop Sabre, then it became a matter of figuring out what features and what size table I wanted. Shop Sabre makes everything from a 4x4 table to this 5x10 table, and they have two different lines of CNC plasma cutters. They have the Sidekick, which is what this is, which is the more kind of intermediate machine, and then they have their Pro line, which is a much bigger base, more feature rich, and more expensive. This is a 5x10 table, and I went with 5x10 because that's the biggest size sheet that the steel suppliers sell, at least here where I am in Southwest Virginia. Being able to put a whole 5x10 sheet on here has already been beneficial. The fab table that we ended up building is a 5x10 table, so that used the entire table. I've cut out a 7-foot tall silhouette of Bigfoot, which necessitated me to put a 5x10 sheet on here. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like buy once, cry once. You know, like I didn't want to have any buyer's remorse, especially for something this expensive. So a few of the things they ask you if you want to customize, I have the build sheet here. One of the things is the torch carrier. This is one of the cheapest option for the torch holder. This is a magnetic breakaway torch holder. And every time you put it on, you have to level it and true it yourself. So every time you bump it or change consumables or it collides with anything and becomes out of alignment, you have to change it manually. I would argue that by far, this is the biggest downfall of my machine specifically. Shop Sabre themselves actually acknowledge that this is one of the weak points of a machine spec'd out like this. And the right way to go is the torch holder that has collision detection. It actually has sensors that monitor if the torch gets moved in either direction, which would then send a signal to the computer to stop cutting. This is dumb, so to speak. So if it gets bumped or comes out of alignment or runs into something, computer doesn't know anything has happened because the only wire that goes to it is the one for the tip, which allows it to figure out where the surface of the metal is. So that's an upgrade that I think I'm gonna do at some point soon. This is just tough to work with. The other thing you have to figure out is what kind of power supply you want. This is a Hypertherm PowerMax 85 plasma cutter. This thing can cut up to 1.25 inch thick steel. I think even 1.5 inches if you go slow enough, which is huge. Plasma cutters work by using high voltage to split the atoms in the air, creating the fourth state of matter, which is plasma. And then they use a jet of compressed air to shoot that plasma through the metal, melting it like a lightsaber. It's kind of awesome. You have to decide what kind of power you have available in your shop. So here I have 223 phase. So anytime you can run a machine on 3-phase, it's gonna be more efficient. So I got the 223 phase version. And I didn't have to go this big. You can go with the PowerMax 65 or the PowerMax 45, I think. It depends on the thickness of metal you're cutting. With a PowerMax 45, you can cut everything up to like 1/4 inch. So for most people, that's gonna be the good option, but being in an industrial scenario and sometimes getting projects that have to do with thick plate steel, I mean, just the other day I had to cut 1/2 inch steel. I was really thankful that I had the PowerMax 85. So this gets power and it gets compressed air. So the other thing that needs to run to this is an air line from your compressor. And I have everything plumbed with 3/4 inch PEX from the opposite corner of the shop. I have an 80-gallon compressor in the back corner. It's got a 3-stage dryer on it, and so that makes the air coming out of it nice and dry, which is very important for reasons I explained in the last video we did. If you have moisture in your air supply, it causes all kinds of conductivity issues in the tip of the plasma cutter and a few other things. And it's just not good for air tools in general to have water in the air. And then there's a data cable here that interfaces with the actual plasma table itself. So this is the signal wire for the plasma cutter, so the computer tells it when to turn on and turn off. Hypertherms are badass. The other option I spec'd for my shop is the water table. So it's really odd for a lot of people to see this and just a metal table filled with water. It seems really weird. But the nice thing about a water table is that all the smoke and the fumes and the debris, or not most of it, like 85–90% of it, generated from the cut gets trapped in the water. If you don't have this, you need like a downdraft table, which has, you know, big fan, pulls a negative pressure on the whole table to control all those fumes. And then you gotta shoot them somewhere. I'm in the middle of downtown Roanoke, and I can't just shoot fumes and smoke out the side of my building because I'm right up against other buildings, and you know, you want to do everything you can to keep city officials happy. So I went with the water table, which other than keeping fumes and smoke down, it actually keeps distortion down too. It helps to cool because the water splashes up on the underside of the metal. It actually helps cool the metal and keep it from warping as you're making these big, long cuts. It was a little bit more expensive. The air table is a lot cheaper. So if you're out in the country, or you have a big ventilation system in your shop already, you might just consider the air table because it was an additional charge. Also, with the purchase of the machine, you get the computer. It did not come with this enclosure. It came with a computer that Shop Sabre themselves, I think, put together. This is another area of the machine that I'm not thrilled with. This computer has had issues, and This is coming from someone who has built custom computers for a decade. They definitely cheaped out on this. The reason it comes with this computer is because it needs a special interface. So these two big cables right here are data cables that go in between the computer and the plasma table. And so in the computer, there's a special card that those plug into that it's their PCI cards that allow it to communicate. But this computer has frozen multiple times during using it, and originally I tried to update it with Windows Update. The Windows updates made everything not work right, so I had to do a system restore and bring it back. To be fair, they did say some of that might happen in the owner's manual, but it's like, it's not confidence inspiring, I'll say that, the computer. But if you leave it alone, it's not connected to the internet, if you don't update it, it seems to work most of the time. And it has this proprietary software on it. So this is the Shop Sabre Plasma controller. You can manually move the machine around with this, with the arrow keys, which is important because you need to assign the XY origin every time you start a cut. The file that you generate from your drawing, and you turn it into a toolpath file in like InRoute, or whether you're using Fusion or something, whatever your post-process software is. Then you put your file on a pen drive, plug it into this machine, pick your XY origin, and you press go. The other thing you do in here is you actually decide, you tell it what thickness you're cutting and at what amps. So the presets are 45 amp, 65 amp, 85 amp. You want to be somewhere in the middle of the chart. So this chart is for 45 amp shielded. The idea is if you're cutting 16, 14 gauge, somewhere in the middle, you would use 45 amp, and then you can go up or down from there. But once you come in here and you pick your thickness and your amperage, and you can tweak the little settings like feed rate, target voltage, early torch off, cutting height, piercing height, all kinds of things. Then you hit OK and then you go. This is a big part of the learning curve. These cutting parameters take a while to learn. The preset ones that come in are pretty good, but you'll find scenarios where you want to tweak it to achieve different results. You know, for the fab table that we built, I had to tweak the 1/4 inch settings for a little while before I got them to where I liked them, because I needed the holes to be as clean as possible. One problem with plasma is that the cuts typically have a bevel, and that is pretty much unavoidable with the exception of a few methods. You can see here, these holes are not perfectly straight. At least I hope you can see that. They bevel in as they go down. And so when I was cutting, before we cut the fab table out, I did a bunch of these little test bricks, I called them, and would change different parameters and then notice what result changed on the cut, you know, how the final product changed based on the setting that I changed. And I did that 25, 30 times, and taking notes each time. I wanted to see what the settings changed in real time. So the presets are helpful, but I highly recommend doing a lot of experiments and get a good baseline for different thicknesses and different metals, especially the ones you're going to be using the most. The problem with that method is that, yes, you're going to waste some steel. You're going to go through some sheet to practice, to learn. Even if you're not practicing or learning, you'll have mistakes. The torch will hit something. The computer will freeze. You know, it is not perfect. Computers were built by humans, and humans make mistakes. So constant learning process. We have footage of this, but this was the first thing I tried to cut out on here. This is 16 or 14 gauge steel, and I barely knew what I was doing when I hit cut on this. And you can tell, a lot of problems with this. It was burning way too hot. I think I was running at 85 amps. Probably had the wrong tip in there. Probably didn't have the right kerf on the toolpath program. So went from this to, these are some small stainless fab plates that I was trying to make for a friend of mine's shop, Driver Motorsports. And once you got the settings dialed in, you can see this is only like 2.5 inches long, and the resolution's pretty tight. Now with plasma is never gonna be as fine as laser. So if this is the kind of thing you wanna do all the time, I highly recommend you look at a laser cutter or even maybe a water jet before you go to a plasma. Plasma is not as precise, but it's really powerful, and it's cheaper. It's a cheaper process than laser. To get a laser cutting table this size to cut this kind of material would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Please prove me wrong though. If there's been a recent development in the laser cutting industry, I'd love to hear about it. But, you know, these are just some of the things I've done. This is the biggest thing I've cut so far. This is 1/2-inch steel, and this is a part that will be welded onto a chassis that we're manufacturing for a local company. To be honest, I feel like this is what this machine was for, because this cut quality is some of the best that we've ever seen. There's very minimal bevel. It's not perfect. With plasma, you have a little bit of post-processing. So on the backside, you have what's called dross. So usually on the backside, you can see it here too. On the backside of the cut, there'll be this slag that you need to either chip off or grind off. And it's all stuff you need to take into consideration when you're billing plasma jobs, is not only the power it consumes, the air it consumes, the tip itself that wears down, the price of the metal, and then the price of whatever other fabrication you're doing for the client. You need to make sure, if you're cutting a bunch of small pieces or a bunch of big pieces, you need to make sure you bill in time so you can go back and clean up all this dross. So lasers don't have that. Another perk to a laser system, but again, you're gonna pay for it. Over here is Steve working on a project, but this is the 5x10 plasma table that we built. In fact, that was the last video that we published. So if you haven't checked that out, definitely check that out. This took 3 5x10 sheets of 1/4-inch steel to build. And if you don't know what these are fixturing tables, welding tables. So these tables are really nice for creating jigs and fixtures and stops and clamps that allow you to make repeated things without having to measure every single cut every single time. Now the issue, which you can probably see, and this has to do with that magnetic torch holder I was talking about earlier, is if the torch gets bumped and you don't notice and you don't stop the machine and recenter the torch, this can happen. And on a table like this kind of sucks, because it's sort of the point of this table to have all these holes exactly 2 inches apart and square and level and parallel. So it is what it is. It cost us about $3.5 grand to build this table. These tables normally cost $6,000 or $8,000. So that's why we did it in-house, because we could, and I didn't want to spend $6,000 or $8,000. But it was a lot of work, and I think Steve will agree. It's not easy, but it seems to be paying off in some way, yeah. By the way, I mentioned this in the last video, but we got the DXF files from MakerTable for this. Understanding CAD files and CAD in general is actually a big part of a CNC plasma cutter, because you're designing parts on the computer, and then that part needs to be translated into something that computer over there can understand, which usually involves assigning tool paths, programming a kerf compensation, and direction of the cut has a lot to do with it. Plasma, for whatever reason, cuts the cleanest on the right side of the cut, so you need to make sure that your interior and exterior geometries are cutting in the right direction. So there's a lot with a CNC plasma cutter to understand. I've used CAD for the better part of a decade now, various programs, Inventor, AutoCAD, SketchUp, and that basis of understanding was very helpful. If you're coming into a CNC platform with zero understanding of CAD, that is probably going to be the hardest part of the learning curve, is teaching yourself how to use 3D modeling software. Most shops bigger than mine would likely outsource that or hire somebody specifically to be the CNC engineer, someone that they could come to with like a bar napkin sketch of the part they need and go, hey, I need 10 of these, draw them and cut them. God, that'd be nice. You get faster and faster at it the more you do it. And the beauty of in-route software, the one that came with the Shop Sabre, is that there's a feature inside that program that you can scan and vectorize images. You can bring in a picture and have it scanned and turn it into lines, basically, or curves it's called. And then you can select different geometries and change things and then turn it into a toolpath and send it to the computer. So that's exactly how I built this. Two sides of the same coin, you know. This is a very precise, labor-intensive project, and this is just art. Shows the flexibility, signage, bracketry, flanges. So, is it worth it? Yes, I think so. If you're a fabricator and you have a shop that can sustain one of these things, and you have the the motivation to learn and tackle the learning curve and to be able to stay on it and the maintenance and everything. Pay attention to your power supply. For the Shop Sabre machines, if you can afford it, spring for the collision detection head for the torch. Again, I'm gonna do that soon. I kind of wish Shop Sabre had a bit more stable computer to run things, but I might have to just modify that myself to make it a little more stable. A little bit of sticking there. With this much money, you think you'd get a decent computer, but it could just be an anomaly too. I know sometimes you win the silicon lottery and sometimes you lose it, so that's just part of it. As far as the servo motors and the actual action of the table, I could not be more pleased. It's fast, it's precise, it's smooth, it's quiet. At this point, I've owned the machine for almost 5 months, and other than things that are part of the normal learning curve, I've had no real issues. I like the water table, like the machine. I'm happy that I have it. I'm happy I went with the 5x10. I think the moral there is get the biggest machine you can. So that way you don't get someone that comes to you with a project and you're like, I can't do it because my machine's not big enough, you know? So overall pleased. Things to research before you buy one of these. The software side of things is a big one. Does the machine come with software? Does it not? How much are you willing to teach yourself about the software? Because you can go with something like Autodesk Fusion that has a lot of settings. You can get really in depth. Or you could just use in-route, like the system that came with this, which is easy to understand to a degree, but it has a lot of limitations. So definitely do your research on the software side of things. You need to have the proper infrastructure for this. Dry air, a big air compressor that can run for a long time. Basically, the same kind of air compressor you need to spray paint, like an HVLP spray gun, you need almost that capacity to run something like this, especially if you're doing big, long cuts that run for minutes at a time. So, you know, power and air supply in your shop need to be bang on for one of these things. Think really hard about the thickness of metal that you think you're gonna be working with and size your plasma cutter accordingly. I kind of went big, both in size and cutting power, but now I kind of realize that I may have gone a little overboard with the PowerMax 85 and could have saved a few grand going with a cheaper plasma cutter, but it depends on how seriously you want to do it. If you're a hobbyist at home and you just want to cut thin sheet metal signs all the time, you 100% don't need a table this big. You can get a 4x4 that runs off the PowerMax 45 and save 10 grand. Price obviously is a big factor. Think about how much you want to spend, and obviously you get what you pay for. So if you're going to be using the machine a lot, try to avoid the DIY, build it yourself, cheapo machines, and take it seriously. Because with this machine, I didn't have to assemble it. I didn't have to tweak it. All I had to do was set it here with the forklift, level it, fill it with water, and I was basically ready to cut. Now, if you're retired or like just you have a lot of time, you really want to just have a new hobby, you can build your own CNC machine for sure. There's lots of kits out there, but you have to tweak it. You have to babysit it. You have to fine tune it. You have to adjust it. You have to, there's a lot more time there. Definitely don't be afraid to ask questions. In fact, I should have asked more questions before I bought this. And there's been times where because for whatever reason, I'm kind of embarrassed to ask for help sometimes. Like there were things I just tried to brute force that I definitely would have been made a lot easier. The result would have been way better had I just called the technician first and say, hey, I'm about to do this, but I'm having these problems. What should I do? Because every time I did that, the answer was they knew exactly what I was talking about, and I fixed whatever issue I had within minutes. And I could have saved myself hundreds of dollars, hours of time. Definitely do that. Shop Sabre, I don't know how other companies handle their customer service, but Shop Sabre is some of the best I've ever experienced. And when you spend this much money on a machine, that goes a long way. Hypertherm too, the people that made the plasma cutter, they've been very helpful as well. So, if you want to go with a different system, there might be other good ones out there, but take some time to call the company and get a read on what the people are like. Because if you buy this big machine, and they might be helpful while they're trying to get you to pay them money, but some companies out there, once you pay and you get the machine, they go kind of silent. So it's nice to know that once you've bought the machine, they're still there to help you. Yeah, so definitely follow Shop Sabre on YouTube, follow Maker Table on YouTube. Adam over there does a lot of CNC plasma work. 42 Fab on YouTube. I believe he uses the Lincoln Torchmate. I could be wrong. I think he actually built his because he works with HTP, but 42 Fab, Maker Table, Shop Sabre themselves on YouTube. Those guys, I watched their videos a lot before I bought this, specifically 42 Fab. Obviously, Lift Arc Studios now has CNC plasma content. Got a few big jobs coming up I'm gonna use this for. We'll probably film some of them. Sasquatch wasn't gonna get his own video, but he made it into this one. And that's it. Do I recommend it? Yes, but do your homework. Thanks for watching.